kind of feel like a news anchor with like my notes. Hey friends, it's your good friend Tim Campbell-Smith, and today we are talking about how people add stigma to mental health, and especially when we don't intend to, and ways we can stop. As well as intentioned as most, or all people I would argue are, there are still little things that happen and that we do that stigmatize mental health, that in different ways kind of almost subliminally say it's bad to experience mental health and it's bad to experience mental illness, and we're going to turn that around. Before we go too far, make sure you like and subscribe for all things mental health, career, photography, and business. So there's a few common ways that we tend to add stigma to mental health. I'm going to give you the basic list and then we're going to run down each of them with some suggestions on how to stop it. So common ways that we add stigma to mental health: we add it through language, through the choice of words. We stigmatize mental health with guilt and shame behaviors. We stigmatize mental health through identifiers. That's kind of language, kind of behaviors, a mix. And then finally, in the workplace. Let's dive into each. So let's start with language. Any language historically that's been used around mental health can be pretty tricky to navigate and difficult. And I'm going to boil the plot now. The general tip here is to only use language to describe exactly what you see. But we use a lot of adjectives and descriptors. And there's some descriptors in common language that are really harmful. A classic one is crazy, by calling people crazy. Well, women were called crazy, and it turns out that they were just experiencing their emotions, and men in positions of power were abusing them. So crazy, for example, is just a really inappropriate term. Another type of term that really stigmatizes mental health, and it's really problematic, are diagnostic terms. So, like, the two most common ones I hear in my personal life are when people go like, oh, I'm really into being clean, I have such wicked OCD. Well, chances are you don't, because obsessive compulsive disorder is a very serious disorder that is diagnosed by a medical professional and involves both obsessions and compulsions to satisfy something that we believe or a need. So no, you probably don't. Or the other one is like, oh, Tim's like a little bit schizo. Like, I mean, referring to schizophrenia at all, dangerous, should never. But using mental health diagnostic words, or just actually using a diagnostic word on someone because of how you feel about them. A common one is narcissist, going like, oh, I don't like John over there. He's such a narcissist. We had a falling out. Well, again, narcissism is a very serious diagnosis that someone can receive and they can work through. So we want to be aware of overused terms, because then they start to lose their meaning and not mean as much. They're not as helpful to use those words. Toxic is another one. We hear that referred to in the workplace all the time. Well, what is a toxic workplace? There's better ways of describing it. And with that, especially those overused words, the other problem with using that language, especially diagnostic language, is it may not be accurate. Someone who hurt you may not actually be toxic. They may have been having a bad day. You may have been sensitive. There may have been a lot of other surrounding parameters. Just like someone who hurts you may not actually be a narcissist. Something a lot of people don't realize about narcissists, and is a core part of the diagnosis for narcissistic personality disorder, is how incredibly sensitive a person is, how lonely they are. And a lot of people don't credit that when they call someone a narcissist. All of that to say, it's inappropriate to use diagnostic terms to describe someone, especially when you are not a qualified medical professional, to diagnose someone as OCD or narcissistic. The big reason that this harms people's mental health and it really stigmatizes it is we don't always know how people are feeling or what they're experiencing, or if they have those diagnoses. And even if they worry that they have those diagnoses, or they worry that they have those traits, your tone, your intonation, and what you're trying to suggest is getting imprinted on them. Also, though, language tends to be very all-encompassing of a person and say, like, that person is a narcissist. Well, there's a difference between, and we're going to get to this in the guilt and shame part, but a person is more than a narcissist. A person is more than their OCD. A person is more than their addiction. But you are just boiling them down to one little thing, and one little thing that you don't like. So that's problematic. Next, let's talk about guilt and shame. We stigmatize mental health through guilt and shame behaviors, typically, and some things we say. First way that we typically do this and we typically see this is anything that diminishes, belittles, ignores, or puts off a mental health experience. That is the way we are stigmatizing it. So, for example, someone who legitimately suffers from social anxiety, they're scared of being around people, just telling them like, oh, you're just nervous, you're fine, go out there. That's a problem. Another example of guilt and shame is totally dwindling someone down to only being one thing with mental health. I know, like, for example, this was my experience when I was in active addiction to alcohol. Some people were like, oh, all they wanted to talk to me about was my alcohol addiction. They'd go like, oh, you're an alcoholic. That must be really hard being an alcoholic. Do you talk to other alcoholics? And it's like, I am more than my addiction, and I am more than this experience. So that stigmatizes it. Next, we stigmatize mental health by through guilt and shame by making someone else's mental health experience about us. So, for example, I'm just going to make a hypothetical situation here. I'll say like, oh, I'm not allowed to go out tonight, or I can't go out tonight because Jim's having social anxiety, so now I can't have fun. I've made Jim's mental health, my husband, about me. Finally, we stigmatize mental health through guilt and shame by comparing people with similar experiences, or may have similar experiences. So you might say like, oh, you have depression? Well, my sister has depression and she's doing way better than you, so I don't understand why you're struggling. That is making it about another person, but you're also comparing them, which is just wildly inappropriate. Don't do it. The next category, the next way that we really stigmatize mental health is by identifiers, just giving straight up identifiers to other people. Calling someone by a diagnosis, which is just expletive, problematic. So saying like, oh, that's Tim, like he's an alcoholic, or oh, we don't hang out with so-and-so because they're schizo. Ugh, gross. When you focus on calling someone by an identifier, it removes all personality, it removes the experience. You have no respect for the humanity of that person. Every single person is made up of many different parts, many different experiences, and you're making it all about one, and usually about one that you don't like. So just don't. The other thing, though, that I will go so far to say is often we use identifiers that are not confirmed diagnoses for that person, and at that point, you are just straight up being a bully. So, like, don't. Finally is how mental health is stigmatized in the workplace. We can't ignore this because most of us spend, 40 hours a week in the workplace and experiencing work, or a third of our day every day, 8 hours. So there's a lot of different ways that mental health gets stigmatized in the workplace as well. One way that I heard, this was shocking to me, was intentionally excluding people from opportunities because of their perceived mental health. So one way that I actually heard from someone was they were not invited to a department-wide, and the department had like 12 or so people. One person got excluded because someone was like, oh, I think they have social anxiety and they won't appreciate it. So they just never even got invited in the first place. Super inappropriate. There might also be a lack of accommodations. Just like we accommodate if someone has a cold, we give them a mask, we give them time off, or we give them like access to resources. We want to accommodate people with mental health and with mental health struggles as well. Another way that stigmatization happens in the workplace is just a complete lack of any policies or practice. Nothing is more confusing than when you call in and say, like, I'm sick, I can't come to work, and your boss says, well, like, what are you sick with? Why are you sick? And you go, well, I'm feeling really, like, depressed and down and very, very sad, and I'm going to go talk to my doctor about my mental health. And they're like, does that count as a sick day? Does that count as a day off? What do you do? How do you handle that? Not having policies and procedures is a form of stigmatization. And part of that, and I think this is part of the remedy as well, is allowing for mental health days off the same way that we treat any other sick day off, and fully celebrating and welcoming that. So a part of that solution, and I discovered this in my research on psychological safety in the workplace, is it's great when leaders do this. When leaders take a mental health day off, even if it's just they need a day for self-care, which is totally fine and lovely, and good, actually. And they say, you know what, I'm taking a day off for my mental health and to practice self-care. So, because when we see people at the top doing it, it gives a lot of other people permission to do it as well. The final way that I think, for now, that mental health is stigmatized in the workplace is any pressure to conceal. So when people don't feel like they can be honest about how they are, how they're doing in terms of their physical health, their social health, their mental health. Pressure to conceal, especially we see this in terms of like when we try to advance. Oh, you might say, I don't want people to know that I'm struggling with anxiety because I really want that manager role in the next few months. Right? That's not okay. That's stigmatizing mental health as well. So, a few ways. Let's talk about remedies to all of this. How can we stop stigmatizing mental health based on all of this? One, especially language is the big driver. The words we choose to use and the words we choose not to use. When describing, especially someone, name exactly what you're seeing. Avoid diagnostic language. And don't reduce that person to only be that one thing. I have a friend, a very dear friend of mine, who has wicked social anxiety. I almost never think of that. I just know that, and I invite her out to lots of different things because I will keep inviting her, and it's up to her to say yes or to say no. But otherwise, I think of her, as a marketer and as a teacher and as a woman and as a lot of other things that make me love her as my friend. I name exactly what it is I love about her without any diagnostic language, and I see her for being a whole person. And especially in workplace, but in life, a way that we reduce stigma is by normalizing conversations about mental health, which is arguably why this channel even exists. Talk about mental health. Make it normal to talk about mental health. Don't guilt and shame people into what they share. Honor and celebrate what they share. And ask folks, what do you need from this? How can I be your biggest champion? How can I love on you? And support them however they feel they need. In conclusion, language is the big driver for stigmatization, for really making people feel just crappy about mental health. The words we choose to use and the words we choose not to use. Address it out in the open. Don't use diagnostic words, and honor and celebrate a person for being a whole human. This lesson on language as well, and using exactly words that describe exactly what you're looking at, is also good for diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice work. So this is just a good principle all around. Comment and let me know. How else have you seen mental health stigmatized? And maybe we can brainstorm some solutions together. As always, make sure you like and subscribe for all things mental health, photography, business, career, and life. Otherwise, we'll chat soon. Bye for now.